What was the most adult film situation you've ever had? Story 1. In college, I lived with 2 other guys in one apartment, and my dog, and the apartment below us were 3 girls. I talked to one of the girls since we had a class together. One fall break, I stayed in town to work as I didn't have a job back home, and so did this girl. But one day I'm at work and had to stay late, but also had to let my dog out. So I texted my neighbor if she was available, if she could get my hide key and let my dog out. She asked what she'd get in return. Jokingly, as she loved my dog, I forgot what exactly I said, but it was somewhere along the lines of adult favors, to which she replied, okay. And for the remainder of the year, we would just text each other to come upstairs or downstairs to hook up. Don't think that'll ever happen again. Story 2. I was on a school trip to New York City, and we were in a very crowded elevator consisting of people from my class and people from a class coming from another school. As we were going to my destination, the girl in front of me started backing up into my junk while she was speaking to her friends. Now I thought maybe it was unintentional since the elevator was so packed. So I tried my best to shift my legs so she wasn't straight up crushing me. As I started to move around, she would move around with me, and 8th grade me was having trouble keeping his hormones in check. Eventually the elevator door opened and it let us all off. And as we were getting off, I saw her walking with her friends. She turned around, smiled and winked at me, and then proceeded to walk away with her friends. This all happened at the Holocaust Museum. That had to be a roller coaster of emotions and feelings, because on the one hand, this guy is ecstatic that he is getting flirty attention from a cute girl. But how are you supposed to strut around all happy in the Holocaust Museum? People would be going up to him and be like, why are you smiling so much? That's so insensitive. Hard to feel somber about the Holocaust at the same time as going through a major puberty transition into a man. Story 3. In college, it was my 21st birthday, celebrating at my house off campus. Girls from other colleges were also there, and the night was over and I was sleeping in my room when a girl I knew from another school came in 20 minutes later and we're banging. Her friend walks in and sees, and we stop. But in my most Parker Lewis can't lose moment ever, I say, are you just gonna stand there or take your shirt off? She laughs, closes the door behind her, and then takes her shirt off and joins in. Best birthday ever. Story 4. I used to work at a restaurant, and a colleague of mine slipped, spilling all the drinks over me as I was trying to catch her since my boss lived above the restaurant. He offered me to take a shower upstairs to clean myself up, and I gladly accepted. However, this was never communicated to his wife, so she thought her husband was in the shower and decided to surprise him. So she snuck into the bathroom because it didn't have a lock, got naked and pulled the shower curtains open in one quick motion while striking a pose. To her surprise, it wasn't her husband that was showering, it was me. I also happened to be facing the shower curtain as she pulled it open. We both froze for a couple seconds and locked eyes. She closed the curtain as fast as she opened it and then apologized about 100 times on her way out of the bathroom. I just started laughing when she had left and fully realized what had just happened. I finished my shower, went back downstairs, and then told my boss what happened. He burst out laughing and asked if I liked what I saw. I answered with a yes, got a pat on the back, and just went back to work. Me and my boss, his wife, never talked about it, but my boss would sometimes tease his wife with it when only the 3 of us were present. Story 5. My neighbor locked herself out of her townhouse dorm over winter break. I was the only other resident living in the complex at the time. The resident assistant who had a master key bailed to his girlfriend's place 4 hours away and wouldn't be back for another 2 days. But he said that he may return sooner. Now, if we called the building director, the neighbor would be fined $200 for losing her keys, and the RA, whom we all liked, would then be fired. So I offered Lydia, the neighbor, the option of hanging out since it was a townhouse and there was room. She said that she would hang out until she could find somewhere else to go and made a few phone calls that went unanswered. So we ordered pizza and watched a movie that evening until she fell asleep on the couch. I put a pillow under her head and a blanket over her and went to bed, woke up with her next to me in the morning, spent the next 2 days intermittently banging, watching movies and making meals, and she had this thing about hanging out in only t-shirts, underwear, and socks. It seemed like every meal prep was interrupted by us having to put things on simmer and go have fun. We should all be so lucky to have a hot neighbor that strits around in t-shirts, underwear, and socks. That has to be one of the simplest yet sexiest looks a girl can do. It creates such a relaxing, fun, and playful atmosphere. I love that look along with the wearing my dress shirt. Only look in the comments. What are some other cute looks that are irresistible when a girl wears them? Story 6. Best friend got married just after college and got paired with someone in the wedding party I had never met. While driving this older Jewish grad student to the bride's parents' place at the after party, she remarks, "I'm glad you know how to drive a stick. because this is the only stick I can drive, and reaches over and grabs my junk for the rest of the ride. We banged all over 2 different rooms and a living room sectional that night while everyone was passed out all over the house. I got laid because the groom did that night. Story 7. My mom hired a guy to build us a deck, and I saw him looking at me through my upstairs window on the first day. He was super hot and Russian, and the idea of us being alone and him working while I just doing my own little thing. We knew what was going to go down. Me being an 18-year-old, I was sold into the idea of screwing this contractor. We banged on the last day of the installation, and he was a good lay, but the deck turned out terrible. Now, is it just me, or is it super rare to hear super hot and Russian in the same sentence when describing a guy? Ladies, weigh in on this. I wasn't aware that the male Russian community was known for their looks. Usually when you think of a Russian guy, you think of some version of Putin or some crazy guy smoking a cigarette and playing on a frozen pond or something. Russian girls, sure, some of them are hot, but to each their own, I guess. Story 8. My roommate at the time and I were hosting some friends in our apartment. We both got pretty drunk, and when everyone finally left, I was cleaning up and she had gone to bed. I got a text from her asking if I could come sit with her for a bit as she felt dizzy from being drunk and could use the company. I go to her room and sit on a chair next to her bed. Now she's lying face down with her blanket over her, and we're just talking. She laughs and says, "You can sit on the bed, you know." So I move over and sit on the edge of her bed. And this is when I notice that she's naked under the covers. Story 9. Was on a holiday in Ibiza in 1999, staying in one of those god-awful concrete abominations designed to house loud, obnoxious British pricks on the holiday. Sitting out on our balcony one evening, having some pre-night out drinks, I can hear shouting, look over, and 2 women are waving and shouting from their balcony. Turns out they closed their balcony sliding door and the latch came down, trapping them. So they shout their room number, and I go down to reception and tell the overworked, heavily harassed staff. They come up with me and they enter the room to let the women out. Now, I can't remember why, but me and one of the women went into the lift down to reception and then back up. Now, it might have been to return a master key that the staff left with us. I don't know. On the way up, this is maybe 3 minutes after meeting her, the woman asked, "Thank you so much. Whatever can I do to repay you?" I jokingly replied, "Well, we could always bang," and laughed. "Yes, absolutely," she replied, heart racing, and not sure that she was joking. She took my hand and took me to her room because the room that she had been locked in was her friend's, and we banged. I was barely 19 and she was 25. It was a lot of fun. Story 10. I teach at a university, and a student invited me to her apartment so that we could discuss the thesis more comfortably. As she said this, she was running her fingers across my back. Before this, she had removed her jacket. She had a tank top and a mini skirt on. It was very, very tempting, but I said, "Thank you, but I have an appointment in an hour. Besides, you'll be busy working on this update to be handed in tomorrow." Story 11. My high school friend's parents were out of town for the weekend, so I was sleeping over at his house. He goes to bed early, but I'm not tired, so I'm downstairs watching TV. His sister, who was about a year younger, comes in and sits on the other side of the couch. I forget what movie we're watching, and there was a fashion show and all the models came out wearing nothing. Now the sister asked, "Do guys get hard watching stuff like this?" I wasn't, but then started when she asked. I still was not exactly a confident high schooler, but she was cute and I felt relaxed around her. So I said something like, "Sometimes it depends. Why do you get wet?" So she giggled and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she looked over at me and asked if I was hard. I was a little scared that my friend would hear her walking, but I knew he was upstairs and I was a frisky teen. So I said, "Yeah, you want to see?" She did. I showed her. Gotta be J. Good movie. Let this be a good reminder, folks, that honesty is sometimes the best policy. Clearly, this girl was asking questions she probably already knew the answers to, inquiring about whether or not the guy was hard, but it paid off for him to say yep and be very direct with her back. Sometimes, and probably most times, girls just don't want to, nor have the time to mess around and might want to get right down to business. Being direct and confident will serve you well. Story 12. A coworker of mine and I got to flirting at work one day out of the blue. She texted me after we got off work and said how hot she was flirting with me all day and that she wanted to hook up. So I invited her over the next day. It was a super snowy, cold day and she came into my apartment wearing a long pea coat that went down to her knees. About 10 minutes of talk. I asked her if I could take her coat and she shyly grinned and shook her head. No. I asked again as it was very warm in my apartment. She sighed, stood up and dropped her coat to the floor. She was wearing nothing but white lace lingerie underneath. I scooped her up and took her right to the bedroom, and we proceeded to have the craziest adult time I've ever had. Wild stuff. I'll never forget that. Story 13. So this was my math professor at college. I was a good student. Once I asked her a question in class and she said to me, "You shouldn't wait for me to come into the class to ask the question. You can come into my cabin." So this happened some 3 or 4 different times, and one day I was stuck on a question, so I visited her cabin. I knocked on the door. She saw me and asked me to come inside. She says, "So which question is it?" I proceeded to ask the question, but I was distracted because she was working on her makeup or something. That scent in the air was turning me on. Trust me, I had never seen her that way. She smiled and asked if I had a girlfriend. Now I said no, and then she proceeds to ask, "Do I look good to you?" I hesitated at first and then said yes. Then I asked her to help me with the question. She helped me, and then as I was going from there, she said, "You can come here anytime." Now, when I look back at that incident, I think, what the heck was that? Never underestimate the nerdy math professor and their ability to feel needy, frisky, and turned on. Also, why is this so confusing for this guy? You're telling me that after your professor invites you over to her remote cabin to be alone with her and she is asking you about how she looks, and if you have a girlfriend that you're not sure what is going on. She isn't an investigative journalist looking for a story. Dude, she 100% wants to see you in her cabin on a weekly basis and take her clothes off. Consider it like extra credit. Story 14. I used to live in a little Canadian mountain town. I had a one-night stand with an English girl, and she left for work in the morning and said that I could sleep and let myself out. I got up for water, and a Australian roommate literally stuck her hand down my pants, grabbed me, and dragged me to her room, saying that she wanted some of what she heard through the paper-thin walls all night. Story 15. I was friends with a girl in high school. We both had the same math teacher 2 years in a row, and this teacher always seated students alphabetically, so she always sat right in front of me. We became good friends over those 2 years and would pass notes back and forth during class, and I had a pretty big crush on her. But she had a boyfriend that she'd been with for those entire 2 years now. I didn't want to be one of those guys that hits on a girl in a relationship, so I didn't. I just flirted a little in our notes. Now I'm an artist, and even back then, I was always drawing, so a lot of our notes had doodles. I drew all over them. One day we are lightly flirting in our notes, and when she writes to me something along the lines of, "You're such a good artist. We should do that Titanic thing sometime," referring to Leo drawing Kate nude in Titanic. She was basically inviting me over to draw her nude, and at that point I'd never done it or even had a real girlfriend. So I'm pretty sure I just replied with something like, "Yeah, it would be cool to draw you sometime." We never followed up on it because I was too insecure to pursue it, and she never went further than to keep saying we should do that sometime. I don't regret it because I met the woman who is now my wife soon after, but it's interesting to think how close I got. Story 16. I work as a gardener, so I'm halfway there already, but at one of my former sites there was an older woman who lived there. She was late 40s, early 50s, but had aged like a fine wine. I'm talking great body, lovely face, and an attractive personality that made you feel easy around her. She jokingly flirted all the time too, which to my 21-year-old me had me real hot under the collars. One day I was using some rope for a job when she asked if I could help her move something heavy in her apartment. Me being the guy I am, I agreed. So I went into her apartment with the rope still in hand, moved the stuff for her, and then she took notice of my rope, crossed her wrists and said, "Oh, is that for me, sir?" or something like that. Whilst giving me what I know now as the look, I chuckled, but left the apartment where I immediately realized that I had an opportunity to playfully ramp up the flirting and see where it went. I was young and inexperienced, but in hindsight she all but handed me a condom and I used it as a balloon to float away instead. That one hurts because it's not like those opportunities just come over and hit you on the head that often. Now you might get a flirty older woman peeking at you while you garden, but how often are you going to get a beautiful body, pretty face, and a fun personality all at the same time? That's a pretty rare sequence of events there. I hope that guy at least made an effort to go back there and do more gardening for her this time. Bring more rope, some handcuffs, maybe some massage oil or something, because it sounds like she would have been down for whatever. Story 17. I was at a party. It was pretty late and I was tired and drank too many beers. This led to a really bad hiccups that despite trying all the methods that my friends were suggesting, couldn't go away. I decided to leave the party and go to bed as it was really starting to get painful. On my way home, I stumbled upon two pretty girls from the party completely wasted. They asked me where I lived. and it turns out that one of the girls lived near me. Great, one of the girls said staggeringly, "You can walk us home. She's going to stay at my place tonight." Man, so I did. Upon arriving at their destination, the two girls started to take me by the hand to come up with them. I was extremely tired, drunk, and these darn hiccups weren't going anywhere. So I politely declined and saying, "I'm sorry, I'm going to go home." "Come on, come with us. You're not fun. We like you. We want to have fun." I simply walked away. I didn't care at that moment, and I just wanted my bed. But boy, I still hate myself for losing the opportunity to win the belt. Story 18. I was once in a bar hopping college as part of our town with my friends. Now I was just getting over a bad breakup, an engagement that ended, and was going crazy, drinking and dancing. I had brought plenty of 1-ounce shots in those bottles you can buy from the liquor store. It was like a 10 for 10 kind of deal, and I had used them to get myself drunk without spending any money. Needless to say, I started eyeing a random girl I saw dancing on the floor. She was with a guy, but they didn't seem too close, rather more like friends. And this friend of hers, mind you, he was super drunk. So she buys him another drink, and I offered to buy her one, but she didn't want one. Turns out he was a co-worker of hers, but they're not together. Now I thought that was it until she went back to dancing, and my drunk self went to goof off and dance in front of her. Somehow, 45 seconds into the dancing, and we started making out. That went on for a few minutes with my friends, filming and laughing until they eventually left us alone. We both agreed that we needed to release this frustration we had for each other. So we walk out of the bar and go to an alley that was right next to the bar that we were in. I felt so badass. I winked at my friends and said to go on without me. And in the alley we started making out, and I stuck my hand in her pants. I somehow made her finish real quick, like in a minute or two, just by playing with her. Suddenly she asks if I want a BJ. Now, mind you, we're in public in the middle of this alley, though. There's no one else there. She unzips my pants and starts giving me a BJ in the middle of the alley. Meanwhile, it turns out that there's a back entrance to this bar, and people start walking in the alley in order to get to the back entrance. Walking past us, everyone pretended like we weren't there. It was funny. That might have been the craziest, most risky experience. That was as close to an adult film as it gets. 10 out of 10 would debate on doing that again. Something tells me, based on the bar patron's lack of any reaction, that is not an uncommon occurrence to see a guy getting a BJ in the back alley. I bet the walls and the ground out there is pretty gross and sticky. And how cool for that guy that he had such an awesome story to tell his friends when the night was over. I'm glad he was able to get a quick rebound and feel better about himself after the bad breakup. In the comments, does anybody else have a similar risky story of getting frisky in public?